brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.
A child of the Vietnam War who fled to Denmark with his family, Danh Vo is a complex artist whose work interweaves the world's collective histories with his own.
Young vocabulary is a global vocabulary. You have a very personal, poetic, subtle way to speak about the world.
It's not just about living an amazing story, it's also about being able to tell it, and I think that's what he does.
A sculptor, installation and performance artist, Danh Vo's works are enigmatic, and their meanings are often open to many interpretations.
It can be very perplexing going to an exhibition of Danh Vo's, but his work also rewards, in a sense, requires the viewer to spend time experiencing the environment that he's created through these objects that sometimes don't make much sense when you first look at them.
I never was interested in hammering things, like impose meaning on people, I think the beautiful of my encounters with art is the weird dialogue that keeps on returning to. I mean, the best work changes with me, and there's very few works that manage to do that. But, we have to try.
In the main gallery of Danh Vo's exhibition at the Kunsthalle, Basel in 2009, the first thing you'd see is a Grand Chandelier. On January the 23rd, 1973, at the Hotel Majestic in Paris, that same chandelier was one of three under which the Paris Peace Accord was signed between the United States and the main warring parties in Vietnam, temporarily bringing peace to the war-ravaged country.
Danh is very concerned about materiality. Objects feature very strongly in his work. And these are often objects that have historical significance, historical meanings to them.
This interest in history stems from the fact that Danh himself was touched by the Vietnam War. Danh was born in 1975, the year the war ended. But the chaos never did. When he was 4, his family fled on a homemade boat, surviving on the open seas until they were eventually rescued.
I guess it was my father that decided to escape Vietnam in '79. So that's the second wave of the refugees from Vietnam, more known as the boat people. And in our case, it was a Danish tanker that decided to, take us up. And we ended up in Denmark.
His work is very much about his personal history, which is quite something. The chandelier that he collected from the hotel in Paris, and he displays them by showing them in a gallery context, which made it for a very powerful experience. You can see that he was trying to come to terms with his own personal history, and at the same time addressing collective history.
Danh has collected and used historical objects alongside his own in a number of his works. In 2013, he exhibited a selection of the personal effects of former US Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, the man who oversaw America's military intervention in Vietnam. It included the pen tips used to sign the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, a precursor to the Vietnam War, as well as McNamara's personal letters to and from the Kennedy family. Despite connections to his personal history, Danh insists his art is not personal.
Somebody defined this idea of something is personal and something is public, and I reject to submit to these definitions. This is an important part of my work, that I try to shuffle these kind of things around. When I work with chandeliers, I never thought that that was personal. I thought that was like anything else. It was a geopolitical decision of very powerful people. I think we all just consequences of these decisions.
I wonder if a lot of that contextual background comes from writers and curators and critics, and maybe not so much from the artist himself. Because I know that Jan likes to keep the work very open. And of course, a lot of the writing is done by art historians and curators, like myself.
Jan sees himself as more of an observer, and his position is ever more apparent in his work Oma Totem, a sculpture he assembled out of the items received by his refugee grandmother when she first arrived in Germany.
Our family split it up in 2 boats. So there was 2 different voyages. And one of them ended up in Germany. People would call that personal, but I thought it was a reflection about this gap. Some bureaucrat sits there and they're thinking, oh, that's like some people from Vietnam coming. How should we deal with them? What do they need? It's just a gap, a miscommunication. And life for me, living in society, it's mostly about the disconnection and the gaps. And I thought that was a beautiful idea of presenting that.
By putting all these objects together and the crucifix on top of it, he revealed something so strong. The fact that these 5 objects was the perfect package of what you need in life. It was not a critic at all, but it was a very interesting way to question it and to put it together.
When I did that piece, people were just estranged from it, They could recognize these things, but it was this weird configuration. But it was the strangeness in confronting the piece that I thought was beautiful.
It can be very perplexing going to an exhibition of Danh Vo, but I think his work also rewards and, in a sense, requires the viewer to just observe and perceive, and inevitably the histories of the work will come true.
His most famous work came in 2010, when Jan took on one of the most recognized historical icons in the world, the Statue of Liberty. He recreated the statue using the same metalworking techniques that built the original, but with the precise intention of displaying it as separate parts, never to be united. The work won him the Hugo Boss Prize Award in 2012.
As an artist, I think I get a lot of stupid ideas and bad ideas too. I've never seen the Statue of Liberty in my life before. But then looking a little bit into it, and I found out it's actually hollow inside. I was like, maybe it's not totally stupid. It's this kind of information that makes you think of an image or an object totally differently. And that's when you have the potential of something interesting.
It's a utopian task to recreate a monument which represents so many things to so many people in copper and show it fragmented around the world. And what is it? Is it like a deconstruction of the value? Is it like a rebuild of the value in a different guise? There are so many different possibilities.
I think Danh Vo is really interested about not the icons, but why and how people create these icons. He's not criticizing it. He put himself more in an observation mode. And by putting together this icon who means so much for so many people, he's questioning, of course, a way to trust, a way to believe.
Coming up, we visit Jan's new solo exhibition in Hong Kong and see how collaboration factors into his work. Conceptual artist Danh Vo is in Hong Kong to open a new solo exhibition. It's a version of his monumental installation at Madrid's Crystal Palace in 2015, called Banished The Faceless. Like his other exhibitions, Danh Vo once more collides objects that don't necessarily connect. The exhibition's main feature is a room filled with 450 prehistoric fossils and one 17th century figure of Christ.
It's mammoth bones recovered from the English Channel, which was during the 10,000 years ago. And now they're here, and I combine it with a 17th century Christ, and they're just beautiful together.
In another room, Jan displays a gold-painted Budweiser carton, within which is a fragment of the original 13-star American flag, and a sculpture made from a 2nd century Roman lion, a wooden head of Jesus, and a modern refrigerator.
When I build an exhibition, I have to look at it for a while before it sinks in. A friend of mine made me realize that in life, you have to embrace contradictions. And I think the exhibition is very much about this, putting things in that collides. And in these collisions, hopefully, meaning plops out in one or the other way. But let's see.
The exhibition is also one of a series of works centering on Jan's current obsession: the 1973 horror film, The Exorcist. If you looked hard enough, you'd realise that some of his pieces are titled after the demon's most colourful lines.
Everybody who saw the film remembers those lines. They were kind of shocking for the time, even now.
If I would say that something is personal, I would probably say that The Exorcist is personal, My mother, she loved ghosts. So when she came to Denmark, we basically saw any ghost movie. My mother, she didn't dare to see them alone, so we were all or 4 kids just around her, and totally afraid. And then The Exorcist came, after that film. Nobody dared to go to the toilet. My father was the only one that was not afraid, So when he would go to the bathroom, with the whole family just jump in there, and peed everywhere. You have to have humor too in the work. I think it's much more than humor, of course, but it's a part of it.
In the exhibition is a key work that reflects a very important part of Jan's art. A letter from 1861 transcribed by his father, one of Jan's numerous collaborators.
This is the entrance piece to the exhibition. It's a very important piece for me. It's a letter that my father transcribes from a French missionary that worked in Vietnam in the mid-19th century. And it's a letter he writes to his own father before he gets decapitated.
The missionary was Théophane Bernard. He was beheaded for proselytizing, which was illegal in Vietnam at the time. The work ties with this early episode in the colonization of Vietnam by the French, and in turn how the Vietnamese language was Romanized as a result of it.
Vietnamese is transcribed into Latin, which was done by the French, but supported by the National Socialists because it would help the population in reading and writing. So anybody today that reads and writes in Vietnamese, they write in Latin. But since my father doesn't really speak French, he just transcribes it. So he have done at least 1,000 of them now. And the work's main purpose is about labor. And it creates, through labor, a gathering point for different social classes, cultural differences, and me and my father, all in one. I think art can express these differences and gaps in society, and that's what this work does.
The relationship with his father is a very important part of his practice. When Danh Vo asked him to rewrite his words in beautiful handwriting, but without an understanding of actually what these words are saying, again, you see this recurring theme of appropriation, of using somebody else's talent to address your own personal history and also collective history.
And your father is not really calligrapher, right?
No, it's just most Vietnamese have a very nice handwriting from that generation and before. My generation are the, bad ones.
The act of collaboration is intrinsic to Jan's art. Almost every one of his pieces is a combination of his and other people's work. The gold leafing was done by craftsmen in Thailand. The mammoth bones acquired from a fishing family in the Netherlands. He has worked with performers and musicians, and most recently, he's curated shows exhibiting the works of other artists next to his own.
I really like the idea that one is not an island. We're always attached to other people, your circumstances, your history, your future. I'm very bad in being alone. I was so afraid of ghosts all my life. I've been so privileged to see so many places and see beautiful things, meet beautiful people. And there's nothing worse than not having people to share it with. And you just need to have a family around you. A family you construct yourself.
After the break, we go to Singapore for Jan's latest installation. And Jan reveals how his art is very much a product of chance. Ever since his breakout into the art world in the early 2000s, Vietnam-born Danish artist Danh Vo has exhibited widely around the world, collecting a number of awards along the way. But, according to Jan, much of his success was the result of chance.
I'm very chaotic, and I always used to say that I was born on a lucky star. I mean, things really come to me. Many of the best projects of mine, they came through chances. And I think you have to be good in seeing these moments and catch them.
One of Jan's best-known works is based on a series of photographs taken by an American, Joseph Carrier, who was both a Vietnam War veteran and gay. They met when Jan gave a talk during a residency in Los Angeles in 2006.
When I talk about being struck by luck, Joe Carrier was fantastic.
It turned out that this guy actually spent a decade in Vietnam. And so for Danh Vo, it must have been quite extraordinary to discover something about yourself and your own country from an American who's been there.
At one point, he asked if I wanted to travel to Vietnam with him, and I was like, yeah, of course, So it was in Vietnam. We saw some guys holding hands, and he told me, Jan, when I saw this for the first time in '62, I couldn't help photographing it. And I was just like, what? Did you run around and take paparazzi photos during the war? I said, yeah, in his garage somewhere. So after the Vietnam trip, I flew back to LA, and there they were, all the original negatives. And it was just so rich,
With Joe Carrier's permission, Jan displayed these photographs in an exhibition entitled Good Life in 2007.
I mean, it was not because Vietnamese, like in many cultures, holding hands was about gayness. It's actually the opposite. It's like in hyper-masculine cultures, and that's why people are confident of holding hands or sleeping together. So it was this kind of paradox and complexity and projections and warfare and love and just that collide. And why I always said that I was very lucky was that because if I have met him when I was younger, I wouldn't be ready to understand the complexity of the work, to understand, that Joe, at that time working in the military, to grasp the homophobia of Joe Carreer's own situation, you know. So it was these layers of power and misuse of power and suppression that lied in the work too. So that's pure luck, you know.
Jan is in Singapore for a new commission for the National Gallery. Almost 40 years ago, Jan and his family, out of pure chance, ended up here in a transit refugee camp on the way to Denmark.
These are the great chances in life. We were only here for 3 months before we got flown to Denmark, but that was during Christmas. So there's this one picture I love a lot where all the kids, you know, with New Year hats and virgins and crucifix around us.
Jan's installation is the first of the National Gallery's new series of commissioned work on its rooftop. Set on a floor of copper are scaled-up pieces of wooden toy puzzles. Like his work on the Statue of Liberty, these larger-than-life fragments are never to be united, although they theoretically can.
So it was an aesthetic way of puzzling some material together. And the form comes from these cubes where you have like different kind of wood blocks, which I always really loved. And it's, yeah, I guess it's installation about love.
And sitting innocuously in a corner is a 2nd century Roman sculpture. As to what it all means, Jan, as ever, remains tight-lipped.
This particular installation lends itself to just the pleasure of looking, which Jan brings to all his projects. There's that beautiful copper floor, the wood pieces that contrast so nicely with the copper almost reacting to the skyline that you see around. There's of course historical context, but in this particular case, I think the first experience is one of looking.
When we first started thinking about this series, it was very clear to me that Danh Vo was the ideal artist to kick off this series. Danh Vo is one of the most interesting and complex artists working today. And I also like the fact that his work kind of makes people slow down. You really need to have a different kind of perceptual mode when you're looking at his work and really spend time appreciating what's before you.
The way he's able to ask questions, to put an observation on the table, always surprised me. And with Jan, one of his work never had a single meaning.
I think it's always easy to connect to art that is personal, that speaks of somebody's life. Danh Vo has an interesting story to tell, but it's not just the story. It's not that easy to turn these things into something that's so interesting and that can speak to so many people. It's not just about living an amazing story, it's also about being able to tell it, and I think that's what he does.
In the art world, you have the chances to change within your own production and all this, but if I find it necessary not to make art, it's totally fine, you know. I've had so many beautiful experiences and stuff that there's enough for more than a lifetime.
Brilliant ideas, powered by Hyundai Motor.